Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that profoundly shapes our professional lives leadership. We often imagine it as this guiding, inspiring force. But, well, what happens when that force turns destructive? We're going to confront the uncomfortable reality of toxic leadership, specifically within the Indian corporate sector. Our source for this exploration is an insightful analysis drawn from extensive experience across various industries. Our mission today is really to arm you with the sharpest insights and practical knowledge, not just to understand these environments, but to effectively navigate and maybe even push back against them.
Exactly. It's a globally recognized issue. Leadership challenges are everywhere. But what's truly fascinating here, and what the analysis really highlights, is how cultural and structural factors in India give toxic leadership its own unique characteristics. We'll be connecting those dots today, showing you why it manifests the way it does here.
You've highlighted that unique flavor, which is key. So let's start by maybe defining what we mean. Our analysis describes toxic leadership not just as, bad management, but as a significant problem, fueled by deeply ingrained cultural factors, intense work pressure, and traditional hierarchies. It can lead to genuinely abusive and exploitative behaviors. But if this is the definition we're working with, what are the most common ways this toxic leadership actually shows up in the daily work lives of Indian employees? What does it look like on the ground?
Well, you'll see it in many forms. It's the outright abusive behavior, sometimes subtle, sometimes not. Then there's the blatant favoritism and the relentless pressure of unrealistic KPIs, those key performance indicators. It's also that micromanagement that just suffocates every initiative, a palpable lack of support and often just plain terrible communication. The analysis really emphasizes how these leaders might use intimidation or overt favoritism or even public humiliation, particularly in those high-pressure, often sales-driven environments where, let's be honest, results frequently trump employee well-being.
Right, those are the day-to-day realities. But our sources suggest this isn't just about one bad apple at the top, is it? These behaviors often seem to cascade throughout an organization. How does that happen, and what's the wider impact?
That's a critical point. This toxicity isn't just top-down. It spreads, almost like a cascade, as you said. You see, managers who are under intense pressure from their superiors often pass that pressure directly onto their teams. They might not even intend to be toxic, necessarily, but the environment, the system, kind of forces their hand. And this creates a cycle that contributes significantly to chronic stress and, frankly, widespread burnout. The immediate impact. It's profound. Increased stress, emotional exhaustion, and unfortunately, very high attrition rates. You lose good, dedicated employees who simply can't sustain it.
Okay, you've highlighted how this toxicity cascades down, but to really grasp its insidious nature, we need to look closer at the specific behaviors, the almost, you could say, clinical characteristics. Our analysis pinpoints in these toxic leaders what makes them tick, and what are those particularly prevalent and destructive traits within the Indian corporate landscape. This is where our sources get really specific.
Yeah, they do. The analysis identifies several key traits. First, micromanagement. And like I said, it's more than just being detail-oriented. It's this constant scrutiny and control over every single aspect of an employee's work, which doesn't just stifle creativity, it actively erodes autonomy and, crucially, trust.
Right, that constant looking over your shoulder.
Exactly. Then there's favoritism. This isn't just unfair. It often sort of weaponizes traditional networking and deference culture. Promotions, rewards, they get based on personal connections or, sheer flattery rather than actual merit. And that obviously breeds deep resentment and fundamentally undermines any principle of meritocracy and kind of incentivizes superficiality over genuine performance. Another really striking trait is a profound lack of empathy and respect. Toxic leaders often disregard employee well-being. They might resort to public criticism, verbal abuse, or outright humiliating behavior. It's not just a personality flaw. It's often used as a tool for control.
A tactic.
Precisely. And of course, the ever-present unrealistic expectations and overwork, this is often disguised as that hustle culture, glorified in sectors like IT, finance, and startups. But this isn't really about demanding excellence. It's often about demanding the impossible, sometimes with this implicit message that your worth is tied to how much you suffer for the job.
Yeah, and it's not just about the long hours themselves, is it? This creates a pervasive, fear-based environment. The analysis actually brings up a really poignant example that drives this home. The tragic case of a young accountant in Pune who died by suicide, reportedly due to overwhelming work stress. It just underscores how leaders can use intimidation and unpredictable behavior to maintain control, actively discouraging employees from speaking up or challenging authority. That fear, it can be absolutely debilitating. When you see stories like this in the sources, what's the one thing that consistently strikes you about the systemic failures that allow such, well, devastating outcomes?
What consistently comes through is how these individual behaviors become normalized,
Ah,
how they persist. It really points to a broader organizational context where employees often feel compelled to tolerate these toxic behaviors. They fear retaliation, maybe career stagnation, or sometimes they simply don't see another viable option in a highly competitive job market. The perceived cost of challenging the status quo, of breaking that silence, is often, tragically, seen as higher than simply enduring the toxicity.
so we've painted a pretty stark picture of what it looks like and feels like on the ground. But what makes this particularly prevalent in India? Our sources really unpack some unique cultural and structural factors that seem to allow toxic leadership to persist there.
Exactly. First, you have the often rigid hierarchical structures that define many Indian organizations. These create pretty profound power imbalances right from the start.
Okay.
This is then compounded by a deep-seated, culturally ingrained respect for authority. India has this traditional value system that reveres elders and figures of authority, sometimes stemming from the ancient Guru-Shishya Parampara.
Ah, the teacher-disciple tradition.
Precisely. That's a tradition of often unquestioning devotion to a teacher or guru. Now, in the corporate world, this historic reverence can sometimes manifest as a powerful, almost unchallengeable deference to superiors. It can make it incredibly difficult for employees to even conceive of questioning or reporting issues, even when they're facing clearly detrimental actions.
That makes sense. What else contributes?
Well, then you add the pervasive fear of job loss. It's fueled by a very competitive job market and relatively high unemployment rates in certain sectors. This makes employees extremely reluctant to leave a toxic job or, report abusive behavior, fearing they won't find another position easily.
Hmm.
And finally, there's the persistent stigma around mental health. Despite rising awareness, there's still a significant fear of judgment or even penalty for seeking help. So employees suffering from anxiety or burnout might avoid discussing their issues openly, preferring to, suffer in silence.
That fear of speaking up combined with that ingrained deference, it really does create a fertile ground, doesn't it? And it's not just the leaders themselves. The analysis touches on the toxic triangle theory. That for listeners who might know this, it's a chilling framework. It shows how destructive leadership, susceptible followers, and a conducive environment all kinds of conspire to create persistent toxicity. And in the Indian context, as you've described, that fear of job loss and the cultural deference can often make followers susceptible, completing this dangerous trifecta. It actively enables the cycle, highlighting how everyone, even indirectly, can contribute to the problem persisting.
Precisely. The combination of these factors, the rigid hierarchies, the cultural difference, economic insecurity, mental health stigma, and the dynamics of that toxic triangle, it creates an environment where toxic leadership can not only persist, but in some cases, actually flourish unchecked. It truly is a systemic issue.
And the impact of all this, it's truly far-reaching, isn't it? Let's look at the tangible consequences, maybe starting with employee well-being.
Hmm.
Workers in these toxic environments frequently experience chronic stress, burnout, anxiety, depression, the list goes on. Over time, this causes a severe decline in self-confidence and can even lead to serious physical health issues. It often manifests as low morale and deep disengagement, making employees feel just unable to perform effectively or grow professionally, and it quickly spirals into organizational impact, right? A clear decrease in productivity and innovation. Toxic leaders don't just stifle creativity, they cultivate this culture of risk aversion that's disguised as compliance. Employees end up focusing on just avoiding scrutiny, leading to a profound absence of the experimental mindset that's crucial for innovation. Because any misstep could be publicly punished. This naturally leads to high employee turnover. The analysis highlights a crucial insight here. Employees often leave toxic managers, not the companies themselves, which obviously causes a significant talent drain and skyrockets hiring costs. And let's not forget the reputational damage. Public exposure of toxic behavior, especially now with social media, can severely tarnish a company's image, making it incredibly difficult to attract and retain top talent down the line.
Yeah, and a critical point here is how these individual symptoms aggregate. Toxic work cultures don't just affect one person in isolation. They erode trust, they diminish productivity, and they fundamentally undermine psychological safety across entire teams, entire departments. This isn't just a hit on the quarterly financials, it's a long-term cost, not only to the bottom line, but to the very culture of innovation, collaboration, and that sense of psychological safety that really defines a thriving workplace. It makes employees feel like, cogs in a machine, constantly at risk rather than valued contributors.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty severe and honestly quite daunting. But our source material isn't just about identifying the problem, thankfully. It also provides some concrete strategies to actually address toxic leadership. So, what does this all mean for what we can do, both as organizations and, importantly, as individuals caught in these situations?
Right, there are definitely things that can be done. For organizations, it really starts with prioritizing leadership training. And this means focusing specifically on ethical, empathetic management and truly developing emotional intelligence among leaders at all levels.
Not just ticking a box.
Exactly. Then, implementing clear, robust policies against bullying, harassment, and micromanagement is absolutely non-negotiable. And these policies need teeth-strong, confidential reporting mechanisms that employees actually trust and feel safe using. Investing in employee well-being is also key. Promoting genuine work-life balance, offering accessible mental health support without any stigma attached. And critically, promotions need to be linked clearly to ethical behavior and merit, not just personal ties or how much face time someone puts in at the office. This is about building a culture where ethical conduct is genuinely rewarded, not just performance measured at any human cost.
That makes sense for the organization. What about for employees facing this directly?
Now, for employees, the strategies are equally vital, though often harder to implement. First, document everything. Assert boundaries calmly, if possible, but meticulously record toxic behavior dates, specific details, emails, even witnesses if you have them. Documentation is crucial.
Keep a record.
Absolutely. Build a strong support network. Talk to trusted colleagues. Find outside mentors or seek professional counselors. Avoid feeling isolated. Gain perspective. Then engage internal channels if they exist and you feel it's safe. Use HR, formal complaint systems, or maybe suggest anonymous feedback systems if the company is open to it. Focus on personal growth, too. Try to seek out positive projects or skill-building opportunities, even if the overall culture is toxic. This helps maintain your self-worth and keeps you marketable.
Right, focusing on what you can control.
Exactly. And finally, the tough one. Evaluate and exit. If the organization's values truly don't align with your own, and repeated internal attempts bring no accountability or meaningful change, well, it's often necessary to develop an exit strategy, discreetly explore new opportunities, prioritize your mental health and self-respect above all. Sometimes leaving a toxic workplace is absolutely essential for your long-term well-being.
That's incredibly important advice, particularly the documentation and the exit strategy if needed. But given the cultural factors we discussed earlier, the fear of retaliation, that deep respect for authority, how realistic is it for an average employee in India to actually take external legal steps if internal ones fail? And what kind of support structures would they really need?
That's a crucial question, and it's complex. While challenging internally can certainly be difficult, it's important to know that if those mechanisms fail, Indian employees do have several external legal options. This could include consulting a labor lawyer who specializes in workplace rights. That's often the first step. They might then approach specific bodies like the Chief Labor Commissioner or perhaps the National Commission for Women in cases involving sexual harassment. There are also civil remedies, like seeking injunctions or damages, or even criminal channels for very severe offenses like assault or grave intimidation.
Okay, so avenues exist.
They do. The key is knowing which avenue is appropriate for the specific nature of the abuse or harassment. And to successfully pursue these, an employee absolutely needs that meticulous documentation we talked about. They need a clear understanding of their rights and often the guidance of legal professionals who can navigate the, frankly, quite complex landscape of Indian labor law. It definitely requires patience and resilience, but these avenues for accountability are there.
Right. Well, this deep dive has truly laid bare the realities of toxic leadership in the Indian corporate sector, from its various manifestations and the unique cultural factors that fuel it, to the severe consequences for both individuals and organizations. But crucially, it also arms us, and hopefully arms you, our listener, with actionable strategies, empowering you with the knowledge needed to better understand, navigate, and hopefully, eventually, help change such environments.
Which then begs the question perhaps for you, our listener, to consider as we wrap up. We've talked a lot today about identifying toxic leadership in others, in managers, in organizations, but considering those deeply ingrained cultural factors we discussed, the hierarchies, the deference, how might recognizing the potential signs of toxic leadership or enabling behaviors in ourselves, whether we're leaders, managers, or even peers, be just as crucial as identifying it in others? If we really want to shift workplace culture, well, maybe understanding is the first step, but that self-reflection and proactive personal change is how we collectively move towards healthier, more respectful workplaces for everyone.